Hi, and welcome to Steel Talk. My name is Danny Stain, and I work in the steel fabricating space. And in this show, I reach out to industry insiders and try and get a handle on how people are navigating this rapidly changing landscape. For many of us, we're now in week 5, 6, possibly even 7 of our lockdowns. For others, you're still free range humans doing what you want. And none of us know for sure whether being locked down or being allowed to roam is the right thing at all. When this virus eventually leaves us, and it will, but whenever that might be, it'll be really easy to look back and say that approach was the right one or that approach was the wrong one. And there'll be plenty of people using that opportunity to politicize the actions of others and saying, I told you so. It's really easy to have 2020 vision in hindsight, but it's like saying, I should have bought Amazon stock when it was $1. But did you? Seriously, did you? Did you know the outcome looking back at it back then? None of us did. We can guess about what's coming. We can look at all the predictive models. We can even examine the assumptions that underpin the models, but none of us knows anything for sure. We're all guessing. But there's one thing that I know for sure, real information is the key. Nonpartisan, free of agenda. The more that we deal with reality, the more that we figure out what is going on, the more we can actually prepare for the eventuality, whatever that might be. Be curious, do research, question the source of the information, don't share bogus info, don't overreact, be proactive, and understand what threats and opportunities really exist. Have a plan A, have a plan B, maybe even a plan C in hand, ready to execute and make sure that your entire team is on the same page. And with so much information to consume and so much disinformation, some of it with political and nefarious agenda, much of it originating from ignorance. So my desire with this show is to continue to sift through the data, examine realities that our friends, our customers, and our partners are dealing with here in the USA and also around the world. And in these discussions, I'm hoping that we're all going to learn something valuable. We'll get some insights on what to do and what not to do, and possibly how to change our business to make it better moving forward. And so without further delay, I'm really excited about introducing my next guest, Michael Papanicolaou. He is the CEO of Union Steel in beautiful Cape Town, South Africa. Welcome, Michael.
Hi, welcome. Hi, Danny.
How are you
Thanks
doing,
for
Michael?
having me on. Yeah, we're doing well, but yeah, we've got challenges. But otherwise, we're healthy. Thank you.
So you're sitting in your house in Cape Town somewhere?
That's correct. I'm sitting in my study, which I've been using now for the past 3.5 weeks. It's been my home because we have a complete lockdown here in South Africa. Our shops are closed, our offices are closed. And this has been where I've been trying to run my business for the last 3 weeks.
Well, thanks for that context, Michael. And there's a lot that I want to cover in our chat today, especially on what it's like to be living in a country that's in or under total lockdown. But before we get into the weeds of what a total lockdown means, tell us a little bit about your own company, Union Steel, and its origins, its history, and where you're at today.
Okay, so Union Steel, we're a family-owned business. My father started the business in the late 50s, so we are 64 years old this year. We're predominantly a fabricator and erector of structural steel around sub-Saharan Africa. We will do any work really in sub-Saharan Africa. We have a couple of different divisions. We do a bit of transport, a bit of crane hire and container logistics and a few other things, but our fabricating facility is our core business. Yeah, we employ about 120 to 130 odd people across all our operations. Yeah, that's really in a nutshell what we are.
So let's focus on the stuff that you and I have in common, and we'll come to the crane hire and the container logistics separately. But in terms of the fabricating operation, how many employees in that side of the business?
All right, so our fabrication shop has about 60 employees. We have 8,000 square meter structure shop and 1,000 square meters of plate plate shop. Um, our The extent of our facility is about 20,000 odd square meters of land. Um, we run a reasonable medium-sized business. We're fully automated now. We have one of your machines operating in our facility, um, and that's been sort of a process over the last 20 years, slowly mechanizing as the needs be.
And do you do your own detailing in-house?
Yeah, so we have our own detailers, all in-house. There are times that we have an overflow, which we go to subcontractors, but we like to keep the engineering in-house. We're very competent guys, and we have a knowledge base which we try and keep close to our chest. We also do our own erection. We have subcontractors. Obviously, we try uh, and empower small, medium, micro enterprises into doing erecting work. So most of our erection teams are subcontractors of staff that used to work for us in the past, and we empower them to run their own companies, and a small capacity of our own to do some erection work too.
Okay. So you said you chase anything that you can get in sub-Saharan Africa, but let me flesh that out a little bit. You're sort of based in Western Cape, in Epping, which is an industrial area. You're kind of halfway between both coastlines. You're in this fantastic area that has some of the most fabulous real estate in Southern Africa, for sure. Some of the most picturesque environments, but you're close to a huge metropolitan population. You're close to the port. Well, I mean, you're pretty much part of the port. You have access to mining and heavy engineering, and you have countries north of the border of South Africa. What do you tackle? I mean, literally, is it anything, or is there stuff that, I mean, I'm sure you go after the standard stuff, but is there stuff that you avoid? Give me some idea of the places that you play in.
To put it in context, the Western Cape region where we are isn't really heavily mining. That's the powerhouse of the South African economy, and that sits further up north in Johannesburg and in the northern regions. Down southwest where we are, predominantly a tourist destination, but also very agricultural. So there are numerous fruit and food industries that have provided a lot of work for us in the past, and that's traditionally what we do. That and warehousing and shopping centres. We have branched out into the mining um, industries of late. Definitely into SADC countries, the neighboring countries in South Africa, so Namibia and Botswana and Mozambique. So we try and get into that. What we don't do is we don't do pressure vessel work or anything, but anything else we will tackle. Certainly plate work or chutes and hoppers, whether it's structures or support work, conveyors. We'll do any of that type of work, and we do chase it because in the Western Cape, engineering isn't really that powerful anymore. So we have to go and scrounge everywhere.
Oh, thanks for that. I think that sort of gives a fairly sort of round view of the fabricating side. So tell me a little bit about the crane hire part and the container logistics. How does that fit in?
So really, crane hire started as an offspring from steel erection, and it just grew. It's a standalone company now. And then that grew on its own into transportation, and we're doing container logistics. We have our own mini container depot, and that's one of our operations that still operates today in the lockdown because we are an essential service. We're moving foodstuffs, essential goods for sanitizers and cleaners and all sorts of other things. Even waste. Waste is still something that's got to be dealt with. So that's still operating, but under really difficult circumstances. There are certain lockdowns in different depots, and the protocols of dealing with containers and with other, with just moving around are very complicated now.
All right, so you have your fingers in a lot of different pies, and your employees have a lot of exposure, obviously in transport and all this sort of stuff coming in and out. So the question obviously is, has anybody in your company been affected or infected with COVID?
As of today, no, nobody. We are, from as soon as we were made aware of the dangers of COVID-19, we went into some sort of self-preservation mode and made sure that we had, all the things that we, PPE that we could possibly use. And now we know exactly what is needed. So we've issued everybody with the right stuff, and we're putting the protocols in place for the guys that are still working. I just want to let you know that our shop is closed. We don't have anybody in our fabrication shop. It's
Well, I'm going to
60
get to
guys
that part.
and okay, right.
Because it's really intriguing, and I just want to get to this part of this. Okay, so before we go any further, Michael, I'm going to kind of embarrass you here a little bit. You and I have known each other for what, maybe 15 years, something like that. I've knocked on your door and you bought some equipment from me, but we've developed a friendship over the years because we're curious. We're both very curious individuals. The thing that struck me that's different about you is that in a country that has this history and a lot of baggage that is a function of its apartheid days of history and some of the developments of more recent years, of all the people that I meet in South Africa, you're possibly the most unemotional. You're able to stand with this clear, objective helicopter view, and you can see it. You have this ability to see it from everybody's perspective. You don't have an agenda that you thrust on anybody. And I've really always admired you for being able to have this viewpoint, because there's a lot of people that drag a lot of junk through this life that they go through there, and I'm sure you're aware of it. How did you develop that perspective? Is that something you inherited from your parents, or is it something that just you gained through university and education? Give me some insight as to where that came from.
Wow. Well. Thank you very much for that, Danny. Where did I get that? I don't know where I got that from. It obviously must be a mixture of many things. Life shocks, definitely parenting. The people that you meet throughout your life. Whether it is spouse and wife, or even children. They all have an influence in you, and they have to have a positive influence in you because. Yeah, there's too much negativity around. I like to stay positive. Of course, I get down, and you get concerned and worried. But how do I stay positive? I think it's something that is probably genetic, I would imagine, and then fueled by the people that you meet and that inspire you, and maybe the books that are read. I would imagine that's where I'd put it.
Okay. Well, you and I have chatted before this thing, and you said we're all struggling with how much data is coming at us, and we're having to consume so much data, and we're not always sure of the source. We're not sure of the accuracy, and we're not even sure that even when it's offered as accurate, whether the data that underpins the assumptions is even real or imagined, and whether COVID has a reproductive factor of 2 or 2.1 and how that's going to affect it. All of this sort of stuff is kind of a little bit overwhelming, but the way that I figure out you and I are both in the same thing is that we're both clueless guys. We're sitting here, we're staring into the deep unknown, and that's the part that makes us a little bit nervous. It's the fear of the unknown.
Yes, I think humans will become humans again at some point. We will need that intimate, close contact. I think that's the way good deals are done, and I think that business needs that. It's not always possible to do business remotely and via a Zoom session, or I don't think that's the best way of conducting a business. So at some point it will happen. I think we will get back to that thing, but it's just the interim measures. How do we deal with this interim crisis? It is a crisis. Everything is upside down. It's in turmoil. We don't know how to handle things. The information and the misinformation that we're being fed is very confusing, and it's not that simple to sort of work your way through the haze to see what's the real thing. Even governments are telling us one thing today, and tomorrow they change their mind. Our industry leaders are doing the same thing, and we're all trying to get a handle on something that is very slippery. But I think time will iron it out. Hell, we just have to buckle in and just be positive. I think that the positivity, the more positive things you say and the more positive people you deal with, I think the better it is ultimately for everybody.
Absolutely. I think you're spot on there, Michael. But let me give some context to our viewers who might not know the unique situation that South Africa finds itself in right now. South Africa is home to about 57 million people. It has some incredible resources, natural resources, an industrial population, an abundance of valuable minerals. It has a diverse wildlife and agricultural growing areas, superb scenery, so it normally generates a decent amount of tourism and so much more. But if you go back to the previous administration under Jacob Zuma, there was some very overt corruption, and there was, even things of state capture, and the country's economy was literally on a state of collapse. So in 2018, when Cyril Ramaphosa became elected president, there were so many South Africans and people overseas that were so hopeful that he could right the ship and attract the foreign investment. And he had a massive task ahead of him. I mean, 2 years later, there's some that have said he's made good on his promises. Others, I'm sure, are saying that he's been completely, lacked in making good. The standard discourse that happens, with depending on your perspective. But on the 26th of March this year, with only 550 cases of COVID in South Africa, and before a single death, he made this unprecedented decision to lock down South Africa completely, which was a phenomenal decision. History will prove whether it was the right one or the wrong one, and none of us know for sure. But please give us some idea of what lockdown means in South Africa, because I don't think anybody here in the States has any idea.
Okay. I'd just like to comment a little bit about the courage of Cyril Ramaphosa, because I think it took a lot of courage for to do that. I think he really understood that if something like COVID got into the informal settlements and the poorer communities of South Africa, it would be wildfire, something that we wouldn't be able to contain. So it probably was I think it was the right thing to do, to close down, just to delay the problem.
By some time, yeah.
The problem is still the problem is still going to come. I think somebody on the television today said the tsunami is still coming.
Yeah.
It's just bought us some time. But what is lockdown being here? Well, as soon as they declared a lockdown, they've only absolutely essential items are available for you. We are locked down at home. We are not allowed to go anywhere unless you're an essential service. So, or you need to go and buy some food, or to go and buy some medication, or go and seek medical help, and essential medical help. Everything else is off limit. You cannot buy any alcohol, you cannot buy cigarettes, you can't even go into a supermarket and buy a toaster. It is only food, and not even cooked food. Cooked food is, the supermarkets may not sell cooked food anymore, it's only raw food. So it is very, very basic, and it's being extremely well policed. There are roadblocks asking you where to go. If you have to go somewhere, you need to have a permit, or you need to be in your neighborhood going to a supermarket or to a shop. So it is extremely strict.
Well, I'm going to come to this, where how it affects, let's call it the general citizens of the country. But let's go to the business side of it first, and let's start off with your company. Like you said, you're not fabricating; you're completely shut down.
Correct.
Are there any
Correct.
fabricators? Are there any fabricators in South Africa that are fabricating steel right now?
I have heard of one fabricator who was fabricating. He's not a structural steel fabricator, more of a platework fabricator up north. He has been doing some absolutely essential work for an essential customer. He was shut down as well. And in fact, we heard that they even were arrested. That's how strict it's become. So nobody, as far as I'm concerned, is lifting a hammer.
So there's no job sites. There's no so this is not just structural steel, but there's no civil works. There's no engineering works. There's no earth moving. There's no road construction. There's no bridge construction. Everything has come to a shutdown, 100%.
Absolutely everything. There's no construction at all. No manufacture, no construction. There's bans on the moving of all types of goods other than what's essential.
Michael, for our American audience, this is just you cannot even comprehend it, because here we've rolled out, and I'm going to call, let's say, stay at home or shelter in place actions that have been done on a regional basis, either by the governors or the county judge or something like that. And it's been all sort of discretionary about adherence. Certainly, there might be a few places where there's some enforcement, but for the most part, if you drive to work, if you want to go to work, if you don't, you don't. And there's been very little enforcement of it at all. So if you take a look right now, there's about 6,000 planes in the sky over North America today. And you're going, where are all these people going? And is this a country on lockdown? But you also see some of those things in a few minutes there. So let's come back to Union Steel. This means income has gone to zero.
That is correct. Not only has income gone to zero, but our customers, some customers, not all, have obviously delayed their payments. The one good thing about being a fabricator is that you have a little bit of a time horizon with your project. So when we go back to work, and we will go back to work, we will have something to do. It's not like our customer base has dried up overnight, where it has done in certain industries. So we'll have something to do. But my staff are at home. They got no income. There is a temporary fund made available by the unemployment. And there are limits to on lower and upper scale of that. So there is some relief supposed to be coming. But they're still sitting at home. And, at home means no income.
So you mentioned earlier on, you've spent 20 years in your business sort of mechanizing and automating it by putting in CNC equipment. And I've watched and observed this process there at Union Steel, and I've looked at the stuff. So you are fairly heavily capitalized by most company standards, certainly in the Western Cape. I think it's one of the leading companies there. So my question then is, are you leveraged, or do you have a cash float? Can you survive a zero income, and how long can you survive this? And I don't mean to ask you to give away something that's important, but I'm just curious from a sustainability level.
Fortunately, we've staged our expansion, and we've never looked at our expansion into automation as replacing people. In fact, if I think back over the years, I think we've increased the amount of people we have in our workshop. The long-staged implementation of technology has also meant that we're not heavily leveraged. We don't have a huge loan of all new equipment in one. It's all been paid off over the years. So from that point of view, we're in good shape. What's not great is the fact that we are coming out of 2 or 3 years of really bad economy. And this is the problem that we're still trying to recover from having really tough years, and we have to try and help our staff as best we can, provide them with some sort of income, while we wait for the unemployment insurance to kick in.
Yeah, from my perspective, I travel to South Africa quite a lot to go and visit fabricators and offer my products there, but I didn't even make a single trip last year. That gives you an idea of how, let's say, how we perceive that economy there. And my heart goes out to South Africa, but also to Brazil, who, finally looked like they were coming out of the disaster of the last 10 years. And then, just as they're starting to glimmer of hope at the light at the end of the tunnel, and then the COVID virus hits. But let's take a look at the rest of the supply chain in South Africa. South Africa has massive iron ore reserves. Are steel mills still producing steel and producing sections? Because, some of those smelters and stuff, can you shut them down? Do they keep running?
Well, I know that one of the steel mills close to us here in Saldanha, 120 kilometers north of us, was mothballed or put into maintenance by the owners because of low demand in steel generally. But that happened before COVID-19. So up north where the big mills are, they were producing steel. From what I understand now, that has slowed right down, and if not stopped. Steel sections have always been a problem in South Africa to find, a reasonable range and suppliers. Certain sections are still imported. So I think the supply chain is going to be affected. It wasn't too bad before the lockdown, but I think it's going to get worse now. Maybe it'll take the mills time to ramp up, and maybe they've got to look at how they're going to be producing with new restrictions.
So let's get outside of structural and let's take a look. I mean, you guys live in this picturesque part of the Cape, and you've got a massive agricultural areas close by you. You also have some of the most beautiful wine estates in the world that rival Sonoma and Napa Valley for the American viewers. Some sort of a history dating back sort of 300, 400 years. Are are the fields being tended? Are the grapes being plucked? Is the wine being produced? What's happening in the agricultural sector? Is that also shut down? I'm sure that from a food perspective, you have to continue with food production.
Yes, I don't think you can stop the trees from ripening fruit. So that has to happen, otherwise the crop will be lost. So there's definitely work going on there. What we do know is that the export of the wine products has been halted. So getting product out of the country might be difficult. And I mean, that's a really good foreign exchange for the country. But otherwise, food, the production of food has to carry on. People need to eat. So, yeah, I'm sure all the fields are being tended.
All right, so let's you mentioned earlier on that the government released unexpectedly some unemployment insurance funds to you guys to disperse to your employees based on payroll and all that sort of stuff. And I believe that Mr. Ramaphosa is actually speaking to the nation tonight. Maybe while in fact, for our American viewers, it's 7 p.m. in South Africa right now. So thank you, Michael, for taking time out of your dinner and your family to spend time with us. But apparently, Mr. Ramaphosa is coming on tonight to make some address, and I think that he's going to either possibly extend it, which he did before, which frightened everybody, and there's a real fear if he extends it now, this is going to be bad, or they might relax it. Where do you think this is going?
Danny, really, I can't tell you where it's going. Where do I want it to go? I think I can answer that one a bit easier. Yes, he is. President Ramaphosa will be announcing certain measures to the country this evening. We are hoping that he is going to relax certain measures to allow business to go back. I'm sure it's going to be staged, but we have to get back to work because we're talking about lives and livelihoods ultimately. We have, I don't know, if my view on the South African population is four classes of people. You know, obviously the upper middle classes. Then we have a working class, which are the people that are employed in the formal sector. But we have this enormous amount of the population that operates in the informal sector. They're not covered by unemployment insurance. They're not, I mean, they really are the destitute people and the vulnerable people of this country. And those are the ones that now have no income. You know, you're thinking about domestic servants or even bin pickers. You know, this is the type of the population that are most at risk. They are not going to be able to get any unemployment insurance. And there are talks of trying to increase some sort of way of distributing some funds to be able to, you know, feed these people, because it's going to, and the fear is that it's going to become a volatile population. We've already started to see unhappiness, a little bit of looting, and it's growing, and that's the worry. We've got to get that control of that.
Well, thanks, Michael. That's a great segue here. So let's come into how this lockdown is affecting the general population. I saw this comment that somebody wrote recently. Social distancing is a luxury that not all can afford. You and I are both very fortunate. You're sitting at your home, your kids are there and everything. But there's this massive sector of the South African population that's living below the poverty line. They are in shacks, they're in settlements, very densely contained. And I think this was part of what you alluded to in terms of Mr. Ramaphosa making the decision, the fear that the virus would catch hold in these very sort of densely populated areas with not a lot of sanitation and all of these kind of things. This 37% unemployment that people talk about in South Africa, it's not that 37% are not working, it's just they're outside of the taxable base. These are the people that are trading on the street corners every single day that have to get up, they have to make a few dollars a day, and that buys them the food to feed their families. If they're forced to stay at home, how do they survive? How do they feed their family that night?
Exactly, Danny, and I really don't know how that happens. There are food parcels being prepared by the government, and they are being distributed to the most destitute. Um, but but it's a huge mountain to climb. I don't know how you can get to everybody. Um, and they are trying. You can't say that. And I'm sure there are NGOs that are doing the same. And there's these charities that we know about. And my wife is involved with some organizations and trying to help those that are vulnerable. But we can't move around so easily. So how do we help them? We also chained to our homes. We can't move around. It's tough. It's going to be tough. That's why we need to find a solution. We need to open the economy and maybe find a different way of dealing with this.
Yeah, and you mentioned rumblings of dissent and the frustration. I'm sure this is because people cannot feed, they're struggling to feed their families, and this dissent is manifesting itself not just in South Africa. We're seeing the beginnings of it here, and obviously, I'd hate to be a ruler in any of these places because you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. If you open up the beaches to everybody and everybody's happy for a few days, but everybody gets sick, then you made the wrong decision. And it's not easy to know what the right decision is right now. The interesting thing that I find in this examination, and obviously, like we started, we're all look at all this data. If you take a look at infection and mortality rates with regard to South Africa, the numbers are very different to what I think you or I would expect. You guys have got a population of 57 million, and based on the current data, I think you have 3,300 infections and only 60 deaths. You have
Yes.
less than one death per million of population. We're right now here in the States, we're 130 times that number. And you guys are only lagging us from 2 weeks from the first infection. So, the part that I find so strange is either social distancing or lockdown worked a miracle here, or there's something else going on. Or is it just that we missing all the numbers and there's people dying in the locations that we just aren't aware of? What do you think is the reality here?
I think there are two things that I'd like to comment on that, Danny. And the one is um, the amount of tests that have been done. There are only 120,000 tests that have been executed in South Africa. So we've still got 56 million, 800 and odd thousand people to test. So that's why we've only got 3,300 reported cases. And I think the death rate is commiserate with what's happening around the rest of the world, in proportion to the amount that have been diagnosed. Um, uh, I think that's really the problem. We just haven't got um, the rollout yet. And also, I think the second thing, which is quite important for us to understand, is the demographic of where the virus came from. It came from relatively affluent travelers. We're talking
Returning
about
from
people
returning
that
from
were
ski trips, yeah, yeah.
correct, either from Italy or from the States or from China or Wuhan itself. And these are generally going to be the people that can afford to fly around. So they are middle class sort of thing. They're not going to be um, rubbing shoulders with their neighbor, when they go out to use a communal tap. We're talking, but it is going to get there, and it already has. So the lockdown definitely has reduced the spread, and I think if that's what the intent was, it certainly worked.
Yeah, very, very. I mean, as I say, that I totally understand in terms of the diagnosed cases would be a reflection of testing. I would have thought that the coronavirus-related deaths would be a more accurate number, and maybe there were other deaths that haven't been associated. But whether it's 60 or 120, as I say, we're 130 times higher than you. 130x is a number that you cannot look at and go, what's different? anyway, look, it's too. That's the problem. It's way too early. It's so easy to make judgments based on the information we have at our fingertips right now, and we might find out that data is not even correct or very inaccurate. Um, so
But there
let's
are
take a
risks. Sorry, Danny.
yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to add something while we talk about there are risks. The risks are that we have a very high HIV infection rate in this country, a very high tuberculosis rate in this country. So these are the vulnerable. And the day clinics are closed. They're not treating those. They're not treating these people that have got underlying issues, and they're the most vulnerable. Um,
And with your
that for me
and
is
with a sorry to interrupt there, Michael, and also with sort of low income people sort of having, let's say, substandard eating habits, you also have a high diabetes ratio as well. And we found that people with diabetic
yes,
underlying conditions are definitely more vulnerable to this virus.
yes. There's a plus side though, and the plus side is we have a young population. So if you look at the amount of people that are dying overseas, it's the elderly. Well, we do have a young population. So from that point of view, possibly there is an upside for South Africa.
Well, let's hope so. So that's a perfect time to segue. Let's gaze into your crystal ball. What's in store for you in the near future in terms of steel work? And when do you think that you or Union Steel gets back to what I'd consider normal production? Let's go late 2019, early 2020 production numbers. I don't mean back when the economy was good, but just let's call it in the sort of the current situation you were before this arrived. How long before you get back to that level? What do you think that timeline is?
I don't think we will get back to that level for at least until um, early the first quarter of next year of 2021. I think to get back just to operate and put some oil into the cogs of the machine is going to take 3 to 4 months. We also need to understand what risks we need to deal with. We have our health and safety team and our human resources team working on that now, making sure that we are dealing with all the risks that we need to identify and start preventing. This is something new. We're going to have to implement new infrastructure, new processes, protocols, and these things are going to take time. And there could be that if we don't implement them quickly, we will be shut down. Especially if we do get an infection in our facility. So we've got to cover all these things. We've got to make sure we're up and running in a way that is sustainable, which will take a few months, I think, before we really are back to full production. As far as the pipeline of work, even during the lockdown, we've landed some projects. We got a couple of orders. We're still tendering. So from that point of view, it doesn't seem as if anything will slow down. I'm sure there will be some cancellations of projects, but they're going to have to understand that to get the project going quickly, it's not going to happen. We need to implement different ways of working, whether it is split shifts or I don't know how we're going to do it. We have a lot of work to do. Certainly the health and safety guys have got a lot of work to do.
Well, let me ask you something that also sort of affects vulnerability and moving forward. You obviously had a lot of work that was being erected or had just been erected. Are you concerned about any slowdown in payments for work that's been performed?
Danny, we're already seeing that, unfortunately. And where that comes from, does it come from the principal contractor or what you call a general contractor? Or is it from the employer themselves, the developer or the owner of the facility? We don't know. But I think it's going to put strain on everybody's cash flow. And obviously we were completing projects that we hadn't concluded final accounts, and we're concerned that they're not going to be very quickly dealt with. And I think that's something that certainly the industry, the steelwork contractors brought that up at one of the meetings that we're still having, which is really good, is to try and find a way of government legislating payment, making sure that everybody gets paid, because ultimately the poor little subcontractor at the bottom of the food chain is the one who's going to suffer the most, and he's probably the one that is most at risk in terms of cash flow, and you're probably working hand to mouth. Um, and it's unfortunately, with an economy which has slowed right down, um, zero growth would have been, I think, a bonus. So we're looking at -7, -8 for this year. Um, it's happened that payments are getting more and more difficult. That's got to stop. We've got to find a way of dealing with all that.
Is the AIS, your SAISC, are they involved in some sort of st stuff taking to government in order to try and change some of these laws? Do they get involved in this? I think it's SA Steel or SAIC. I can't remember the exact name for the South African
Yeah.
Steel Institute. But do they get involved with this, or does it rely on a consortium of owner operators trying to, lobby this and move a bill through the government?
No, they most certainly are taking a front seat on this, and it's very good because we have a contractors committee which are contributing to this, and that definitely the Southern African Institute of Steel Construction is lobbying government and finding ways of opening the economy again and getting us going. It's something that is, in the last few days, the amount of correspondence going backwards and forwards of plans of actions of how to get uh, government to accept us opening the economy, certainly from the construction and fabrication point of view. They've been very vocal. It looks like they have a direct line with the Department of Trade and Industry, which is fantastic. And obviously, the contribution of the contractors is important. I think many of us that have got a lot to say, and we need to try and get more around the table, so to speak, and contribute.
Yeah, well, I wish you luck on that. And I certainly have got a great deal of respect for SAISC. My dealings with them over the years, a good operation there. Um, I think that there's one good bit of information is if I look at the countries north of your border, South Africa's border, whether it's Namibia, Lesotho, Botswana, Mozambique, Swaziland, Zimbabwe's a little bit iffy, but in terms of diseases, they are not, they have, this hasn't taken hold. As of right now, they seem to be not disease free, but on a very, very low scale. So, it, a real big infection flare up in a place there, just hurts the demand of everything. And hate to see one of your customer countries sort of just opting out, but that looks good right now. Um, just coming back to Mr. Ramaphosa and the ANC, based on what he's done and how he's done this, and obviously how he handles the subsequent stuff, do you see them gaining strength within the South African electorate, or do you think this has been not well received? How do you see it playing out?
I don't believe the South African electorate is going to uh, change their allegiances very quickly. You will get a small portion maybe moving around, deciding who to support. Um, I think I think Mr. Ramaphosa needs to come out um, looking like he did the right thing for everybody, and I think that's going to be really difficult. He's got to appease everyone, and it's a no-win situation for him. But I don't believe that he's going to lose too much power. I think he will continue this way as long as he finds a way going forward that um, everybody can buy into. I think even business and the labor unions and the poor, the middle class, everybody needs to buy into and really understand this thing. And fragmentation is the last thing we need now in a country where the last electoral poll, if there was 30 parties on the ballot paper, it was. I'm misjudging it, but it was something like that. So we don't need it. We need real unity now, and then we need to support whatever he decides to do.
Yeah, I think in these times, people look to leadership, and when they see honesty and integrity, it doesn't matter what side of the fence you sit. It's easy to rally around that decision maker. When it's politicized or there's an agenda outside of serving the people, that's when it kind of comes off the rail. And we saw that if you look back 100 years and 1918 at the time of what we call the Spanish flu or the swine flu, and how the government tried to spin it back there and saying there was no risk while people all around were dying. They were controlling the media. Those were the sort of things where you lose faith in your government, and that has a long-term repercussion for how you look at your government. And you said even in South Africa, there's a skepticism towards the ruling party, and that's the thing that no government wants to deal with moving forward. Anyway, let's move on. Sorry about that little bit of segue there. You're at home. You're in your office. You're sitting there. Who all's at home with you?
Well, it's my wife and two children that we're at home. The kids are back at school. Um, it's a normal school term for them. They are doing their schooling online, so at 7:45 in the morning, they have to present themselves in front of the computers, and they have class normally. Um,
So
and they fulfill it.
they have a full normal school day from 7:45 till closing time, and there's teachers in front of them all day.
That is exactly correct. They have tutorials in the afternoons. They have homework to do. Um, it is in all intents and purposes a normal school day for the children.
And your son is what, he's 17 and he's in final year of school. And the South African school, for my American viewers, South African school calendar year starts in February and it ends in December. So this would be his final year of high school.
That's correct. He's supposed to be writing his final exams in November for grade 12. Um, midterm exams are supposed to be in June, and then they write a mock exam, I think in July or August, and then finals in October, November. So a very critical time for him because he needs to prepare for, after school. And, the kids are putting the work in. There's no issue with that. The only concern is how do we finish the year going forward when the lockdown stops? I think my daughter, who's 14, is in grade 8, also going through a normal school work, but probably less stressed as to completing certain curricula. And what has been tabled was possibly allowing the grade 12s to go back to school a bit earlier, but phased, keeping distance, and making sure they're prepared to write their final exams in October, November.
That's interesting. Yeah, where I think we're all learning how technology can keep the doors open. We're seeing in our industry in terms of the equipment supply, we're even learning how to train people using augmented reality or virtual reality so that in the inability to ship, we can ship machines, we can produce or manufacture a machine and ship it somewhere, but we can't send a service technician to install it. And now you're going to put on a set of goggles and you're going to have a service tech next to you there virtually, and you're going to install your own welding robot, or you're going to install your own drill line or your shot blast machine, or you're going to service your own car. You're going to have this capability as if there was a guy next to you telling you exactly what to do and how to do it. And so this ability to digitize the way we go to market, whether it's with education or manufacturing, or I'm looking forward to the day where you guys start 3D printing your steel buildings. I'm sure that's just around the corner.
I don't think that's far away, but if we're looking at the way that we do things, it's going to take a long time before we can, change a conventional steel section. But we could very possibly be in the same boat. Moving people around is what we do when you go to a construction site. That might come to an end. It might be end users having to erect their own buildings. They might have to use the same technology. We don't know that yet. It might be the way of the world from going on from now on.
Yeah. Just staying at home, I believe your dad and your mom are still both alive. I mean, they've got to be in their 80s or 90s now. I mean, they must be really sort of like a vulnerable age in this environment.
Yeah, both my parents are alive. My father is 96 now. He started the business back in the late 50s. But, at that age is rather frail and needing full-time care. And my mom is 88. So, yeah, they are vulnerable. And we've taken cognizance of that, and their carers. We're fortunate enough to be able to provide full-time care for them. And we have to make sure the carers are well looked after. We take them home, we make sure we drop them at home, we go collect them every day. Um, it's something that we
And,
realize
and,
that
and the reason
in
you're
the
doing that is,
transportation,
yeah, is to avoid public transport.
transport,
I can, yeah.
yeah, that's where we know if you've seen a South African mini taxi, it's a 15-seater with 30 people in it. It crowded, and it's so, I mean, that is really the biggest risk of the spread, and we just decided, okay, well, that's one way of eliminating that. Look, the restrictions of the lockdown um, have allowed a bit of public transport. I think for a couple of hours in the morning and a couple of hours in the afternoon, realizing that not everybody has access to a motor car to get where they have to go. But the restrictions on public transport are basically you may have only a third of the legislated number of people sitting in the vehicle. So a 15-seater may only have 7 or 6 or whatever it is. There are different legislations. So for a normal passenger car, it should only be one person in the front, one in the back. And that's very well policed. Roadblocks are stopping to check your permits. It is very well policed. And just getting back to the carers, they have their own protocols, making sure they change clothes when they come to the home. They have their own sanitizing protocols to go through, and then when they leave again, it's exactly the same thing has to happen. So it's tough for everybody, and I think the old and the infirm are most at risk. So we are aware of it. It's it's one of those things.
Well, Mike, I always enjoy our chats. We've had a dinner or two, we've shared a beer or three. Um, there's one question that just hangs over this entire thing. How are you surviving without alcohol?
Well, Danny, you know those presents that some distant relative brings you, a frangelico or something. They start looking rather appetizing. They're the ones that are stuck at the back of the cupboard.
Now, I really have to ask, is this really serious that there's been no alcohol sales in South Africa for over 4 weeks?
That's correct. The sale and the transportation of alcohol, other than for sanitary reasons, is banned. So yes, you can walk into a shopping center and the alcohol aisles are cordoned off. You cannot buy any alcohol at all. That and cigarettes. And there's a funny side to it, but there's a very serious side to it too, Danny, if I may. And that is, a country like South Africa has a tremendous alcohol problem. Our hospitals are full of accidents due to drinking and driving, or they are full of close contact violence due to some sort of alcohol related incidents. And it makes sense to try and eliminate, you don't want to have your hospitals full of that nonsense where you've got COVID-19 patients to deal with. So there are a couple of issues. Obviously, you don't want to have that clogging up the medical system from a serious point of view. But yeah, I think it's going to be tough for a few people.
Yeah, I actually read, interesting you mentioned this, because I read that Groote Hospital, which is your large national hospital in the Cape, where my brother actually served his internship as a surgeon. He They were reporting that instead of being overwhelmed, they actually have more ICU beds available because they don't have the car accidents, they don't have the trauma related to stabbings and gunshots, and they're actually waiting for the COVID people, which hasn't happened, fortunately. But for the first time, they've actually got a low demand on their emergency rooms, which is absolutely, there's another side to the story. Yeah?
There is another side to it, and it just shows how bad the alcohol can influence the medical system. So was it intentional? Very possibly. And if it was a good move. It was a clever move to open up all those hospital beds. Yeah. But one thing that was quite interesting, Danny, is that the wildlife around South Africa has taken over our streets. It's quite amazing to see. In Simonstown, which is a little village just outside Cape Town on the coast, there was a video of penguins walking down the main road. It's quite amazing thing. So we've got, we've got a breeding pair of fish eagles that live very close to our home. They're coming closer and closer and closer. So wildlife is really getting closer to us now. And porcupines are coming out of the forests, and we're seeing leopards on on cameras, photographs. I think it's very interesting that
Yeah,
the impact that we've had.
yeah, I saw some pictures from the Kruger National Park with just these lions just sleeping on the roads that are normally, where all the tourists drive, and they've just realized this place is not being traveled, and you've got this lovely tarmac road that cooks nicely in the day and provides a nice warm sleeping
Exactly.
surface. And you're just seeing this all over the place. Yeah, so it's amazing how quickly animals and wildlife adapt to the changing circumstances. Michael, honestly, I could spend another hour just chatting with you on a social level. I've always valued your friendship. I've always valued your helicopter view, your sort of really your curiosity about how things work. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today on Steel Talk. I sincerely hope that the President's speech this evening is positive news for you and for your business and for your employees, and that you're back at work and really quickly. Um, Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate that.
Danny, thanks for having me on. I'm quite flattered that you asked me to come and talk, and it has been great fun. I really enjoyed it. And if I may, I'd just like to say to my staff who are hopefully all listening in, guys, hang in there, guys and girls. I'm sure there's a way out of this quickly. They really hang in there, and I am thinking about everybody, because we don't have the face-to-face conversations. We have a WhatsApp chat and a Zoom meeting with the odd people, but this is probably the first time they've seen my face in about a month. So, guys, hang in there. It is pretty tough, and we'll come out of this stronger on the other side. I'm absolutely positive about it.
Well, thank you, Michael. I really appreciate that. And to our viewers that have tuned in today for this wonderful podcast with Michael Papanicolaou, thank you so much for all of your suggestions. As you know, we're broadcasting twice a week now, Tuesdays and Thursdays at 1 p.m. I cannot right now reveal who my speaker will be on Thursday. I had a cancellation, but I will let you know really shortly. Thanks for sending in your comments and suggestions. And until we see each other again, thank you so much. If you like the show, please make sure you give us a big thumbs up. Hit the subscribe button down below, and we'll see you soon. We'll see you on Thursday at 1 o'clock. Thanks, Michael. Thanks, everybody. See you soon. Bye.
Thank you. Thanks, Danny. Cheers. Bye.